The numbers hit like a punch to the gut. Home sales across Canada just plunged, prices slipped again, and for the first time in years, the so-called unshakable real estate market looks like it's cracking. Justin Trudeau, the man who once promised that housing was a solvable problem, now finds himself staring down a freefall that's shaking both homeowners and his government. As the dream of owning a home slips further away for millions of Canadians, the question isn't just how this happened, but whether Trudeau can still fix it before the crash takes him down with it. What's going on? The real estate freefall. It's not just a dip, it's a slide that's starting to worry everyone from first-time buyers to seasoned investors. The latest numbers show home sales in Canada fell 1.7% in September, marking the first real drop after months of what looked like a steady comeback. That's a warning sign that the momentum driving the market earlier this year is running out of steam. For a while, it seemed like the worst was behind us. Prices were stabilizing, listings were climbing, and confidence was quietly returning. But this new decline feels like a cold splash of reality, a reminder that the housing market isn't immune to the pressures building across the economy.
Facing this part of Ontario in particular, the drive to buy phenomenon that has seen people come down the 401 from the GTA until they can afford a place to live.
Prices are now slipping again, down around 0.1% month over month on average. It might sound tiny, but when you zoom out, it's the start of a much larger pattern. Some regions, especially in Ontario and British Columbia, are seeing steeper corrections. Buyers are holding back, sellers are slashing asking prices, and deals are dragging on longer than anyone expected. The market that once rewarded speed and aggression is now punishing it. You can feel the hesitation. People are scared to make the wrong move, and that fear is freezing activity. Since the 2022 peak, a lot of markets have already lost a serious chunk of their value. The frenzy of bidding wars, blind offers, and all-cash deals feels like a fever dream compared to today's quieter streets and longer for-sale signs. In parts of Ontario, detached homes that once sparked bidding wars are now sitting unsold for months. Some sellers are walking away from deals, unwilling to take the loss. Meanwhile, in smaller cities and more affordable provinces, prices are holding up better. Places that didn't overheat as much are weathering the storm with less damage, but the overall chill is spreading. The reasons behind this freefall are layered, but they all connect to one thing: pressure. Rising interest rates have turned mortgages into heavy burdens. Every rate hike by the Bank of Canada ripples through the market, making buyers recalculate what they can afford, and often realizing the answer is not much. Even those who qualified before are being squeezed by renewal shocks, with payments jumping hundreds or even thousands per month. The affordability crisis that pushed people to the edge during the pandemic boom hasn't gone away. It's just evolved into something colder and more complicated. At the same time, inventory is swelling in unexpected places. Developers who bet big on continued demand are now stuck with overbuilt projects, especially in condo-heavy markets. More homes are hitting the market, but buyers aren't biting. It's not that people don't want homes, they just can't afford the same ones anymore. This imbalance is stretching the time it takes to close sales, forcing price cuts that ripple through neighborhoods like falling dominoes. Then there's the cooling demand. After years of panic buying and fear of missing out, fatigue has set in. People are waiting for rates to drop, for clarity, for stability. The urgency is gone, replaced by a cautious stillness. And behind the scenes, tighter mortgage rules are making it harder for borderline buyers to qualify. Lenders are more conservative, appraisals are stricter, and new stress tests have trimmed purchasing power across the board. All of this combines into a perfect storm that feels different from past corrections. This isn't just a small market adjustment, it's a psychological reset. Canadians are realizing that the era of easy gains and endless appreciation might really be over, at least for now. What comes next will depend on whether confidence can return before values fall too far. But for the moment, the mood is clear. The free fall has begun, and everyone's holding their breath to see how hard the landing will be. Why is Trudeau and Canada shocked? For years, real estate in Canada wasn't just a market, it was a belief system. Homes weren't supposed to lose value. They were the safest bet, the sure thing everyone relied on to build wealth or secure retirement. And now, that illusion is cracking. The recent downturn has shaken something deeper than just property prices. It's shaken confidence in the entire economic story Canadians were told. For many, it feels like watching a national promise fall apart brick by brick.
Housing is a solvable problem, and we're all going to solve it if we work together. Canada has done it before, and we're going to do it again. It's also great.
That's why Justin Trudeau looks blindsided. Housing has been one of his most talked about issues, a key promise in speech after speech. He stood before cameras assuring Canadians that housing is a solvable problem, repeating that Canada had done it before and could do it again. Those words carried hope when prices were rising and construction cranes dotted the skyline. But now, with sales falling and values dropping, those same words sound less like optimism and more like pressure. Because when you've built a political message around fixing housing and the market starts crashing, everyone starts asking, what went wrong? For Trudeau, the political risk couldn't be higher. His government spent years unveiling initiatives, housing accelerators, tax credits for first-time buyers, rental supports, and deals with provinces to boost supply. Yet despite all the announcements, affordability has only worsened. Opposition leaders like Pierre Poilievre have jumped on this moment, framing the free fall as proof that Trudeau's entire housing strategy has failed. The narrative writes itself. A prime minister who promised solutions but delivered chaos. And in politics, perception often matters more than policy. At the heart of this shock is a mismatch between messaging and reality. Trudeau keeps saying housing is solvable, but Canadians are watching prices swing wildly, developers halt projects, and families get squeezed between rent hikes and mortgage renewals. The gap between words and lived experience is growing, and that's where disillusionment sets in. People aren't just frustrated at the market, they're losing trust in leadership. Across the country, you can feel that shift. What used to be dinner table conversations about bidding wars have turned into anxious talks about interest payments and dropping equity. For a government that tied its image to hope and progress, this downturn feels personal. Trudeau isn't just facing an economic problem, he's facing a credibility test. And for many Canadians, this might be the moment they decide whether they still believe in his version of the future. What has Trudeau done and promised on housing?
There's real challenges. I met with service providers for vulnerable populations yesterday who described to me the extent of the homelessness challenges that are actually translating into healthcare challenges.
When Justin Trudeau first started calling housing a national challenge, it sounded like the beginning of a bold plan. And in fairness, his government did roll out several big-ticket programs aimed at speeding up construction and helping Canadians buy or rent homes. The most talked about was the Housing Accelerator Fund, a $4 billion program designed to reward cities that actually get things done. The idea was simple. If municipalities agreed to cut red tape, approve density, and modernize zoning laws, Ottawa would send them money to build faster. One of the first success stories came from London, Ontario, where city leaders agreed to legalize up to 4 units as of right on most residential lots. No extra bylaw changes, no endless approvals.
But if I could conclude with one message, today isn't about $74 million. It's not just about municipal zoning changes.
In return, they received roughly $74 million from the federal fund. That move was meant to be a model for how Canada could move past bureaucracy and actually get shovels in the ground. But Trudeau didn't stop there. His budget 2024 included several smaller but symbolic measures, like allowing rent payments to count toward credit scores. For renters who've never missed a payment but can't qualify for a mortgage, this was meant to level the playing field. The government also raised the insured mortgage cap to $1.5 million, giving some breathing room to buyers in high-cost cities like Vancouver and Toronto. Alongside these measures came the broader National Housing Plan, which promised to supercharge construction, expand community housing, and break down barriers that make buying or renting a nightmare. On paper, it looked like a blueprint for a turnaround.
The $4 billion Housing Accelerator Fund, a fund to build more homes faster, we told municipalities that they could access those funds.
Still, for all the policy talk, many Canadians feel the progress has been painfully slow. Cities that applied to the Accelerator Fund often ran into the same problem Ottawa was trying to fix: endless layers of delay. Permits, local politics, and bureaucratic overlap kept projects stuck in limbo. The federal government's vision of unlocking supply collided with the reality of provincial and municipal gridlock. Critics argue that by the time funding gets approved, housing needs have already shifted. And as prices fall, some developers are putting projects on hold, unsure whether the numbers still make sense. Now, with Trudeau stepping down as Liberal leader, the conversation has shifted from promises to legacy. Did his housing policies change anything meaningful, or were they just political bandages on a much deeper wound? Supporters say he laid the groundwork for systemic reform. Skeptics say he was too late to act and too slow to deliver. Either way, the housing crisis will outlive his tenure, and how history remembers him may depend on whether those cranes start moving again or stay frozen against the skyline. How the freefall undermines Trudeau's plans.
This is extraordinary, and it's leading to a $74 million contribution from the Housing Accelerator Fund to the City of London that's going to get more homes built in this community.
The housing market slide couldn't have come at a worse time for Justin Trudeau's agenda. When your entire platform is built on fixing the housing crisis, a sudden freefall doesn't just hurt homeowners. It undermines the credibility of every policy you've tried to sell. Programs like the Housing Accelerator Fund were designed to spur new construction, but when prices start falling, the math behind those investments stops making sense. Developers pull back, investors get nervous, and projects that looked profitable months ago suddenly stall. The funds Ottawa sends to speed up building lose their punch if builders don't see a financial reason to move forward. That's exactly the danger Trudeau faces now. His government pushed cities to commit to more density and faster permitting in exchange for federal money. But when the market weakens, municipalities can easily backslide. Local leaders who once cheered "build, build, build" start hesitating when they see home values sliding and tax bases shrinking. Political will fades fast when there's fear of oversupply. In other words, the very momentum Trudeau worked to create could collapse under its own weight if cities decide to slow down rather than risk a glut of empty homes. Then there's the public reaction, especially among younger Canadians and first-time buyers. They were supposed to be the winners in Trudeau's housing story. The promise was simple: more homes, lower prices, and finally a shot at ownership. Instead, they're watching affordability crumble while their faith in the system disappears. For those who bought during the boom, the drop in prices feels like betrayal. The narrative that once worked so well, "we're building more to make housing affordable," has flipped. Now critics are asking, why didn't you prevent this crash? Every new policy announcement risks sounding reactive rather than visionary. And in politics, perception is everything. Trudeau's opponents are using the downturn to hammer home their message that his government overpromised, overspent, and underdelivered. Inside the Liberal Party, there's also growing unease. When markets tumble, even allies start to question strategy. Pressure mounts to change direction, tweak policies, or shift the blame. For Trudeau, who's already stepping down as leader, the housing freefall isn't just an economic setback. It's a symbolic unraveling of one of his biggest legacies. The collapse isn't just in the market, it's in the very narrative that once defined his government. How Trudeau's strategy could adapt, what to do next. If there's one thing clear from this housing freefall, it's that Canada can't afford to keep doing business as usual. The system is too fragmented. Federal money moves slowly, cities wrestle with red tape, and provinces argue over jurisdiction while builders wait for clarity. For Trudeau's housing strategy to survive and evolve, collaboration has to become more than just a talking point. Every level of government, federal, provincial, and municipal, has to move in sync, not in silos. That also means bringing in private developers, nonprofits, and even community-led housing groups to the same table. When everyone shares the same roadmap, the chances of meaningful progress rise dramatically. The next big shift has to be in how funding works. The Housing Accelerator Fund has potential, but it needs to be more flexible. When markets are booming, it's easy to hand out grants tied to growth. But during downturns, cities need support to keep going even when projects aren't profitable. That means backing municipalities that are struggling to move forward, helping them implement zoning reforms or build rental units when investor confidence fades. In a soft market, the federal government has to play stabilizer, not just cheerleader. Then there's the issue of risk. Developers and builders are understandably nervous right now. If they fear that falling prices will erase profits, they'll stop building altogether. One way Trudeau's team could adapt is by offering limited guarantees or shared risk contracts, ensuring builders aren't left stranded mid-project if the market dips. This would help keep construction steady and prevent projects from being abandoned halfway through. Trudeau's housing policy also needs a clearer focus. For too long, the cranes in major cities have been building luxury condos while families hunt for affordable places to live. Redirecting efforts toward mid- and low-income housing, infill projects, and repurposing underused land could make a real difference. Supporting infill development, using existing urban land rather than sprawling outward, saves costs and time while revitalizing communities that already have infrastructure. And then there's the human side, communication. People are anxious, and silence only fuels distrust. Trudeau's team needs to manage expectations honestly, acknowledge the risks, explain the timeline, and show what's being done to cushion the blow. Canadians don't expect miracles, but they do expect transparency. If Trudeau's housing vision is going to adapt and survive, it'll depend on one thing above all: regaining the public's trust through action, not just promises. Real stories. Examples to humanize London, Ontario has become something of a testing ground for Canada's housing ambitions. When the city signed on to Trudeau's Housing Accelerator Fund, it was hailed as a win for reform. London promised to legalize up to 4 housing units as of right on most residential lots, meaning homeowners could build more without getting tangled in extra permits or bylaw changes. It was a brave move for a mid-sized city trying to modernize its housing model. Ottawa rewarded them with about $74 million in funding, and for a moment there was hope. But on the ground, things still feel fragile. Developers are hesitant, construction costs are high, and interest rates have drained confidence. The big vision, faster builds, more supply, affordable options, is struggling against economic gravity. Take the story of Emma, a 27-year-old early career nurse who works at a London hospital. She grew up in the city and dreamed of owning a small condo near her workplace. But even with a stable job, that dream has slipped further away every year. Rents have climbed, and mortgage rates make ownership nearly impossible. So she commutes from St. Thomas, nearly an hour round trip every day. It's not just the fuel costs that wear her down. It's the lost time, the stress of traffic, and the sense that no matter how hard she works, the system is rigged against her. she's not alone. Across Ontario, thousands of young professionals face the same dilemma. They're vital to the community, but they can't afford to live in it.
This has national implications, but that's not my message today. My message is to every mayor, to every council, to every city, to every community in this country.
That gap between policy and reality is where frustration brews. London may be building more, but new units take time to complete. And when developers pull back because the market looks risky, those timelines stretch even further. The irony is that the very people policies are meant to help, like Emma, feel the least visible in the political conversation. They hear about billions in funding and national housing plans, but see little change in their daily lives. You can see similar stories playing out elsewhere. In cities like Kelowna and parts of Metro Vancouver, projects that once symbolized growth are now stalling midway as financing dries up. In Calgary, investors who rushed into pre-construction condos are watching their returns vanish as market conditions shift. And if you look abroad, the warning signs are even clearer. Take what happened in Ireland after its 2008 housing collapse. Years of unchecked speculation followed by a brutal crash that wiped out savings and confidence for a generation. It took them over a decade to rebuild trust and stabilize housing again. The lesson for Canada is simple but sobering. Housing isn't just about numbers or GDP. It's about real people trying to live stable lives. When housing becomes a gamble instead of a guarantee, the ripple effects hit everything: productivity, family stability, even mental health. For Trudeau's government, the human stories behind the statistics should be the real compass. Because if people like Emma can't afford to live where they work, no amount of policy speeches will fix what's fundamentally broken: a housing system that forgot who it was meant to serve. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.